So, these children have been given beautiful names, and I'm sure their parents have thought long and hard about what name to give them. They might have even prayed about it. I'm going to talk about a young man whose parents gave him the most inappropriate name. Like, have you met people whose name just doesn't suit them? Well, his parents might have been considered to be a little bit unkind because the name that they gave him was Destroyer. Now, who would want a toddler called Destroyer or a teenager called Destroyer? What parent in their right minds would do that? But there were some parents who did this to the poor child, and I'm going to tell you how God's plans for that poor child turned out. A bit of background. This person lived 160 years after Joshua and Caleb, and the Israelites had entered the promised land, and things were not going well. The instructions the people were given on entering the land were to drive out the indigenous peoples, not to intermarry with them, and to worship the one true God, Yahweh. However, guess what? They didn't quite drive out the local people. They took a fancy to the young girls and the young guys, and they married them, and they started to worship other gods. Why? Why? Part of the problem was that they were shepherds, and they were sent to a land where farmers were needed, and they didn't know how to farm. And because they were intermarrying with the local people attributed the richness of the land to their worship, and they worshipped Baal and Ashtoreth. And this involved child sacrifice, self-harm, and public ritual prostitution, and God hated it. It wasn't what his people were meant to be doing. And so because the local people told them that if they wanted the land to work for them, they did what they did. They did kind of mix and match religion, like some of us do here. If you hear that something works, you give it a go. So they gave it a go. Despite the fact that they'd seen Yahweh help them escape slavery and survive in the desert and fight battles, they thought maybe they needed another God to help them farm. It's easy to judge them in hindsight, but when someone tells us that yoga is good, or that crystals are pretty and effective, or that Buddhist meditation brings peace, or that we can get comfort if we go and talk to our departed relatives in a spiritualist church, or if a film shows us that if we engage in something occult, we get power and, we can control our lives a bit better. How many of us know people who've done that? But they're clearly attached to other religions and forbidden in God's word for a reason. Their society was just like ours, where people will do anything. And the result was that they'd broken their covenant with God. Do you remember how he invited them to be his treasured possession? Like, why would you give that up? To be God's treasured possession, to belong totally to him so that the whole earth can see what it looks like to be one of God's people. He took them on a journey of freedom from slavery. He protected them. He supernaturally provided for them in extraordinary circumstances. He showed them how much he loved them. And they left it all just to try something else. They deliberately walked outside of his protection, and the practical result was that everything was going wrong for them. They had been terrorized for 7 whole years. Like, things have been difficult for us in COVID, but can you imagine it going on for 7 years? But what was happening to them was that the surrounding tribes were noticing when they planted their crops, and they came and they trampled on them all, and they took their animals, and they were becoming impoverished, and they were frightened. They didn't know what to do. They resorted to living in caves in the hills. This was God's people in his promised land. They were in despair, afraid and desperate. And that's what happens sometimes if we walk outside of God's protection. He waits until we're desperate. And then they remembered, oh, Yahweh helped us, didn't he? Maybe we should ask him now. So they did. They called on the one true God to help. And he sent a prophet who told them how it was. God said, I was the one who rescued when you were in Egypt. I was the one who brought you here and drove out the people when you were prepared to fight with me. I gave you this land. I rescued you from all your oppressors. I am the Lord your God. I told you not to worship the gods of the other people in the land you live in, but you haven't listened to me. And it was right. And he could have left it at that, but he didn't. Because God's not like that. God wanted them still as his treasured possession. So despite their unfaithfulness, he did something. He went to visit this poor, very young man with the very inappropriate name, because at this point, the destroyer was hiding. He was hiding in a winepress, trying to thresh a little bit of wheat that he'd grown without the Midianites seeing him. And God took him on a journey of discovery, very much like he does with all of us. You see, this young man believed some big, fat lies about himself, which affected what he was doing with his life and what he believed was absolutely possible and what wasn't possible. God had to change his mind about who he was before he could step into his destiny. And it went this way. There he was, hiding. And a stranger came to sit underneath a nearby oak tree and greeted him and said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Was that some kind of sick joke? Couldn't he see that he was hiding? Couldn't he see that he was clearly afraid? Was he just, had he heard about what his name was? How did he know? How did he know? And this poor guy was cowering in the corner. He was feeling sorry for himself. And when he heard him say that, he was cynical. His reply was, "What? Why are we in this mess if God is with us? I've heard about what he did years ago. But where is he now? Why are we in this mess? He's abandoned us." The stranger, being ever the joker, replied, "Go in the strength you have." Ha ha. This is the guy that's hiding in the corner. "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hands. Am I not sending you?" Well, who is this guy? What is going on? Then came the excuses. The destroyer said, "I don't think you really understand the situation. You see, how can I save Israel? You see, the people I come from are not acceptable to others. We're kind of scorned. I belong to the Halfa tribe with the Egyptian name. You know, these Israelites, although we're Israelites, they've never really accepted us, and we're only half a tribe, one of the not so important ones. And leaders come from the bigger tribes anyway. Look, they won't accept me. They won't listen to me. It's not the way it's done round here. I've got the wrong background. It's not, don't be daft. And what's more, I'm the least in my family. There are other people more qualified. I don't feel strong enough. I'm powerless. Someone else could do it better. Don't be daft. What was he struggling with? He was struggling with insignificance and hopelessness that were born out of his situation. He didn't know who he was. He didn't know who God had meant him to be. The stranger replied, I will be with you. And what's more, you're going to strike down all those Midianites in one go. Now, if that stranger was just a man, that wasn't much assurance, was it? But this stranger knew his name and was engaging in a conversation that was beginning to bring him hope. It was an outrageous thing to suggest, but there was something inside the destroyer's heart that was beginning to beat. You know when you get the tingling and excitement that you know that this could be an encounter with somebody that's a bit bigger than you? Have you met God like that? Where your heart just starts to beat faster because of something that somebody said? Maybe despite being afraid, this guy had dreamed of things changing. Maybe all the stories of how God had saved his people had taken root and he longed for it to be true, but he just couldn't see how it would happen. Maybe he longed for God to do it again. Have you ever been like that? You see, for an intercessor, the prayers just appear as cries in your heart. For the leader, it might be knowing what needs to be done or seeing the bigger picture. For the teacher, it would be longing for someone to say something, someone to, maybe, you know how it should be said, but you haven't yet said it. Or maybe you have got compassion on the people and you just, I don't know. For the worship leader, it might be that your experience of God in worship just overflows and that you long to share that and that he gives you songs in the night. For the one created to help, that you just see things that need to be done and you just want to do them. And so it goes on. You see, what God created us to do is wired in us. And it creeps out even when life is hard. Even when it looks unlikely. And God wants wants each one of us to reflect him in a way that is unique to us. Like these children will reflect God in ways that is unique to them. Every single one of us will. And the guy called Destroyer was created to be a warrior. His name wasn't a sick joke. God was encouraging him and lighting up hope in his heart. And God was enabling him to see what was possible. At this point, he knew he should do something. And he asked for a sign that would show him that maybe this person was a bit more than just a stranger. But the only thing he knew what to do was to make an offering. So he asked the stranger to stay and wait while he did it. And culturally, what they did was they created a meal. But the thing was, he had to catch his goat first. So he caught his goat, and he killed it, and he prepared it, and he cooked it, and he made some bread. And the stranger's still sitting under the oak tree, waiting for him. Patient guy. And then he came with his dinner prepared. I'm just going to move this for a minute to show you something. And I better blow this out. Because he came with his dinner prepared. Here it is in the bowl. And the stranger said, put it on the rock. This is my rock. And he said, pour out the sauce on the rock, on the dinner. So here he is with his dinner. It's probably, I don't know, is it roast goat? Is it goat curry? I'm just hoping this is going to work. Right. I'm pouring my sauce out. I've been watching a lot of Australian MasterChef, and sometimes they make foam. This is my sauce. And the stranger took his staff and the whole thing burst into flames. That was one thing, but the stranger disappeared in that moment. And Gideon, because that was his name, was afraid. Because Gideon knows that people don't just disappear, and people don't just light up the dinner and burst it into flames like that. Well, not like that. He did it he did it properly. And God spoke to him at a moment and he said, "Don't be afraid, Gideon, you're not going to die," because Gideon genuinely thought he was going to die at that time. And God gave him so much peace that he built an altar and he worshipped. And he called the altar, "The Lord is Peace." And he was beginning to change because he had encountered God, because encountering God always changes us. And that night, Gideon had a dream and God spoke to him and the adventure began. You see, God said, "Take a mature bull from your father's herd, tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Ashtoreth pole. Build a stone altar to Yahweh on top and burn the Ashtoreth pole as fuel and sacrifice the bull." Now you have to understand the significance of this. These people were trusting in Baal and Ashtoreth for their food. It was the equivalent of burning down Tesco's and planting a church there every night. And people getting up and saying, "Where's the food? What's going to happen? How can we eat?" So he took a few mates right then in the middle of the night, and he did it while no one was looking. Was that cowardly? No, I think it was quite sensible. I would have gone when nobody was looking, wouldn't you? If you're going to do something that big in the community. He did it. The next morning there was uproar. Who did this? They investigated and they hunted him down. They were looking to kill him. He really was in serious trouble. But for some reason, his dad, it was his dad's altar. It was his dad's pole. But for some reason, his dad knew that this was the right thing to do. And he turned to the mob and said, "If Baal has a problem with this, if he's really a god, let him deal with the destroyer." And they walked away. They walked away. Why would they be hunting him and ready to kill him and just turn around and go away? It's because God was behind it. But the problems for the people increased when the surrounding tribes joined the forces and approached the land ready to attack. But Gideon had already grown in faith and confidence by then, inspired by God. He raised the shout and called the tribes to come. And then he lost confidence. Because before them, even though tribes came to be there with him, before them was the enemy encampment. He checked out with God that it really was him and that he was going to do what he said he was going to do. But there he was, camped with 32,000 men, not a bad number, is it? But there was 135,000 men. The odds were 4-1. And God said to him, "If you fight with these guys, they'll think they did it, so you've got to send some home." So he told the ones that were feeling afraid to go home, and 22,000 left. He was left with 10,000 to face 135,000. The odds were worse. God said, "That's still too many, take them down to the water." So he took them down to the water, and they had their swords and their spears. I've been thinking long hard about this test. This is my church warden's poll. I can't think of anything else about what it's for, but today it's my spear. Right, okay? And here's my sword. So if you're a soldier and you're told to get a drink of water and it's on the ground, what do? You see, some of them thought, "Oh, all right then, I'll put that down and I'll put that down and I'll get down and I'll drink like a dog like this. But they were exposed. If you do that, you have no weapons and you can't see what's happening. But if you put one down and you like this, and you get the water with your hand and you drink it like that, you can see everything's around and you're still armed. So God wanted the ones that were ready and were vigilant. And that's what that was all about. And out of all those 10,000, only 300 were fit for purpose. The odds were now 450 to 1. God told Gideon to go in the middle of the night to the enemy camp and listen to what was saying. And God had given a dream to one of them. He dreamt that there was a big loaf of bread and it rolled down the hill and it rolled into the Midian camp and it destroyed it. And then his friend said, "Oh, that means Gideon's going to kill us all." And so the word must have spread through the camp. And Gideon heard the conversation and he ran back to his camp. He woke up his 300 ones that were going to be any use to him. And he gave them something. He gave them what God told them to. And he said, "Take with you," here we are, "a trumpet and a torch, and you put your torch in a pot, and that's how we're going to battle." So, what do you do with your sword? You can't have a trumpet in one hand and a torch and a pot in the other. They went into battle unarmed with just what God said. No weapons. They sneaked around the camp and it was still dark. And they waited until Gideon gave the call. And then they all blew their trumpets at once. And they raised their torches and they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." And fear and confusion swept through the enemy camp. They started fighting each other. They killed each other. And the ones that were left ran away. And they chased them, and the other Israelite tribes came and joined them and chased them until they were all gone. You see, what God had said he would do, he did, through the one man who was brave enough to believe who God said he was. What would have happened if he refused to believe what God said, if he continued to think that he was an insignificant nobody? With no destiny, that everything was set against him, everything was set against his family, nothing would have changed. But the guy did. He took that step of faith and said, "Yes, I agree with you, God. If that's who you say I am, that's who I'm going to be. I'm going to listen to you." And he tried it out. It was like he asked for confirmation, but every step of the way, God was leading him just a little bit further into, try it this way, try it this way. Try it this way, until he did exactly what God said. And that's how it is. Look, we try things out with God. We go on that adventure with him. If Ruth was here, she'd be shouting out, "God doesn't make rubbish!" And he doesn't. There's not a single one of us that is substandard or a reject or doesn't have a destiny. Every single one of us is unique and made in his image. And there's not two of us that are the same. He knows each one of us by name. He knows who he made us to be. You know, these children are not accidents. He combined that DNA in the perfect way to make that child and that child the way he wanted them to be. And it's the same for all of us. It only takes one person to believe that God has a purpose for them and run with it once they know what it is, however unlikely it seems, for a nation to be changed. What if we all did that? But how many of us think like Gideon, God can't use me. My family never amounted to much, so I won't either. I was born in Luton. Luton isn't a very nice place, and nothing significant comes from here. Do you know what they said about Nazareth? That's exactly what they said about Nazareth. Nothing good comes from Nazareth, and look where Jesus was born. Maybe we think that leaders only come from public schools, like we've got a few of them in the government at the moment, haven't we? All feeding each other and their mates. But Jesus was born in nowhere. Maybe you think you're not qualified. Maybe you're too old. Maybe you're too young. Maybe you're too poorly. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's something that you've never had a go at before. Maybe you're afraid. Maybe you can't see how. Maybe you think God isn't for you, or that he wouldn't choose you, or that he's abandoned you. Gideon felt all of those things. How many of us know who God called us to be? You know, while I was preparing this, it's been kind of cooking for a little while, I was driving along in the car and God said, Martin's like a mountain goat. And I thought, what? Really? Why is he like a mountain goat, God? Oh, it's because he's confident and he's happy in the high places with God. And that when I was seeing the picture, the goat leaped. But it wasn't just a little leap, it was a leap from one mountain to the other, and that's faith. Because Martin's a man of great faith. And when he jumps, he'll be jumping with confidence and he'll go. Thank you, Martin. I'm glad God sent you to us. But there's a few more. Hang on, where's my book? Just as we were praying at the beginning, I saw Janet as a bride. Janet has great love for Jesus. And as she approaches Jesus with her love and in her worship and prayer, like the train of her dress was full of people, and she takes people to God. She intercedes for them, and he gives them to her, and people come to know Jesus because of her prayers and because of her worship. Where's the guy in the pink shirt? Not here. Must have gone out. You. North Face jacket. Yeah. Do you like playing strategy games? Yeah, you. You'd like playing strategy. Do you know why? I saw a picture of you, and you were stood on a mountain with Jesus, and he was pointing out things in the distance, and you could see the whole thing, and he was showing you strategies. And I wouldn't be surprised if you couldn't see, the reason you like strategy games is that you can see strategy. Are you good at them? Yeah, okay. Well, God wired that in you, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if you weren't gifted in the prophetic, because that's part of that gifting. Yeah? Okay, no, don't clap, because I've just been listening to God. You're the one, the blue dress. You have a merry heart. You're designed to spend time with Jesus and delight in his presence as you do, and he will feed your heart and he will grow you. You have a gentle spirit, but he will show you things. He will show you heaven's secrets, and he will give you words that you can give to other people, and they'll bring life. That's you. You. Where am I? You're a joy giver. Your delight in the Lord delights his heart. And as you delight in him, the joy kind of spreads. But as you do that, you carry light that affects other people. Is that right? God knows. I don't know who them from Adam. They're nodding. I've never done it like this before. This is odd. Tony, saw you holding a torch high and carrying the light of Jesus, and you were showing people the way with the light that you carried, and you're called to disciple people. I've got Claire has been very kindly listening for people. You're there, Claire. Phil, where's Phil Roast? Is he here? All right. She saw you like a badger, and she said, you're like a truffle hunter. You're faithful, wise, and encouraging. And that Natalie, his wife, you're compassionate and giving. You have a mother heart, and you cover others in prayers. And God says you're beautiful in his eyes. Marissa, you're a robin. She's gone out. But, Marissa's designed to carry the melodies of heaven. And when she's in those melodies of heaven, she leads us into worship that way. Gemma, you're like Lucy in Narnia. You're shown a path that others can't see, and God's calling you to trust and step out when you know the way to go. He knows. He does. I'd love to hear what you're going to say. But change starts here. It's seeking God to find out who we are in him, who he made us to be, and then going on that journey with him to explore what that looks like. Change starts here. Whatever the odds are against us, Gideon dealt with 450 to 1. And God won. It wasn't Gideon, it was God. It's when we choose to believe him. It starts with one heart that dares to believe what God says and follows him step by step in obedience. So, here we are. Let's just close our eyes. We're going to ask God something. Lord Jesus, will you just show us one lie that's getting in the way of us being in exactly who you want us to be? Just one lie. Just listen to him right now. Maybe it's that you think you're not good enough. Maybe it's that you think people won't listen to you. You're not brave enough. What is it that you've disqualified yourself with? And now, Lord Jesus, will you just show us the truth that we need to know that kills off that lie? What's the truth you need us to know? You got it? You're going to run with it? Now it's up to you to listen to God and just go with him.